Chapter 1 Intern Director of Stark Industry. Peter Parker was the heir to Stark Industry. The papers have been drawn up. Tony had signed as the official owner of SI. Pepper had signed, the exhausted CEO, happy to hand over the legacy. Aunt May had signed, the guardian. The only one who hadn't signed yet was Peter, the unknowing heir. Peter had worked as an unofficial intern for over 2 years. His official title, if anyone asked, was Tony Stark's personal intern. But he worked in the R&D lab to help out with the other interns regularly, and he knew a lot of interns fairly well. Anyone of the SI employee who had met Peter had spoken highly of him. Polite, funny, slightly shy, until he became more comfortable with the environment and started to show his prowess. Once he got used to the labs, he was happy to walk around and dabble in people's projects, giving them needed assistance and such. The interns were smart. They had to be, to get into the program. But Peter Parker had the subtle intelligence that was incomparable to any other interns. They should loathe him for being high school kid and smarter than any of them, but he was too damn nice to hate. It was for all these reasons that there were a protocol with Stark Industry called the Young Boss Protocol. It was only to be implemented if both Pepper Potts and Tony Stark were both in emergency situations and needed someone to take over Stark Industry for a period of time. Peter Parker would immediately become the head of command, taking his rightful position as the heir. Peter, of course, had no clue about either of these, being the heir or the Young Boss Protocol. Every time Tony tried to bring it up, he chickened out. The kid was so unbelievably ignorant of the entire situation, despite being a literal genius. It was funny. He'd assumed some whispers about being the heir would have trickled down, but nothing. Pepper and May had left the subject to Tony to encroach him. Tony had eventually, after much dabbling, brought it up with Peter when they'd been tinkering on Mark 62. Pepper and I have been thinking, Tony had said, spinning a spanner in his hand loosely. How would you feel about maybe having a bigger role in Stark Industries? Peter looked up at him with a grin. Attention shifted from the helmet he was tinkering with, like an intern? An intern. Tony was supposed to be telling the kid that he was the heir to the company, and he thought he was going to be an intern. He wanted to chuckle. Pepper had agreed that it was better to tell Peter earlier than later. Hell, everyone else pretty much could tell Peter was the future of the Stark Industries. From the way he could casually walk into the intern labs and solve equations without spending more than a second of looking at it, and from the endless amount of official projects he had to cut budgets on by solving problems, it was clear. His selfless nature left everyone else in awe, and Peter was still coming out of those situations thinking he had done the normal thing. Just help people. Tony smiled at him. I was thinking a little more like intern director. He couldn't just drop the whole heir thing on Peter yet. The kid would probably faint on the spot, especially if he had been so excited about just being a proper intern. They'd have to face up to it. That was okay. That was what the young boss protocol was supposed to be for, anyways, to get Peter used to being in control. Intern director. Peter's mouth fell open, and he somehow managed to knock the tub of stark raving hazelnut ice cream onto the floor. They'd had a mini fridge and a freezer installed in the lab ever since Tony found out that Peter was significantly more efficient and more creative if he constantly snacked on something. Also, both of them had managed to forget that their bodies needed food to function and would just work for 9 hours before collapsing from hunger. They hadn't really noticed. The ice cream was a favorite for Peter, so Tony made sure he kept a permanent stock of it in the freezer, among other things. When Ben and Jerry's had asked if Tony wanted to discontinue the flavor, as it was supposed to be a limited edition, he'd arranged for their creative team to meet Peter, who had begged the entire company to keep it going. There had been tears, and it worked surprisingly well. And the director, Ben and Jerry's, had agreed continuing stark raving hazelnuts after meeting Peter, possibly out of fear. It had then become a permanent flavor, and Tony had silently thanked the Lord. He didn't want to live in a world where Peter's favorite ice cream flavor was discontinued. Yeah, kid. You'd be looking over the interns, keeping them on track. If they have any requests or demands that override their intern head, they can come to you. Technically, that would be part of Peter's role once he become a fully fledged boss, so Tony wasn't lying. An intern director would be a good role for the kid, even if it had made up on the spot. He basically checked up on all the interns anyway when he was wandering around the lab. This was made official. Tony made a mental note to make sure SI hadn't already hired an intern director. That would be a conflict of interest. There were intern heads, of course. Tony mentally scoured through the list of employees for Stark Industries' research and development team. Pepper would not be pleased. But, Mr. Stark, Peter's brow furrowed. I'm only 17. Surely there's someone more capable to be director of all the interns. I mean, holy moly, I've never had a proper job before, except working for one summer at Delmer's. Tony stared at him. Pete, kid, you've been working for me for years. You're the smartest person I know except for maybe myself and Bruce Banner. You've got this. Peter started to shake his head. But I have no experience in managing people. Tony looked at his kid, wearing a crumpled hoodie, donning the words, "What part of incredibly complicated math equation do you not understand?" He'd seen Peter Parker argue with him to the death about repulsor technology quite correctly in the end. Peter had presented his argument with a completely calm face, voice getting louder but remaining clear to understand. It had, in fact, become quite scary. He'd be able to manage people no problem. Trust me, kid, you'll ace it. And if you don't like it, we'll find a different role. But you've got this. Tony punched the kid's arm and watched as Peter gulped and nodded. Unbeknownst to him, from then on, Peter Parker was the third in command. Pepper, as CEO, still ranked first, then Tony, but ranking above any of the other heads of the department or members of the board was Peter. The appropriate people had been informed, intern heads and the like, and this information had quietly trickled down to the lower employees. Anyone who questioned why some teenager, now ranked above them, was reprimanded strongly by Pepper herself, and no one went against Pepper Potts. It turned out that Peter was actually a very good manager. The shy kid from Midtown High School who sat back and had no problem reprimanding some of the interns for when they had exploded a room, although had acknowledged that it was an accident, and had been pleasant in reminding them that they needed to either check the equation before the experiment or relocate to one of the explosive-proof rooms. Peter had quite enjoyed overseeing all the interns' project. He'd given some of them ideas to spring off. It had led to several inventions being published with Peter's name attached to them, which pleased them greatly. Peter had to manage school alongside his job, so his hours were largely in the evening, overseeing projects, and whenever he had free periods and had time, Pepper came and checked on him frequently to make sure he was doing well with his homework, as that was equally important as the work he was doing in Stark Industries. But Peter had never had trouble with schoolwork. This new role just gave him something else to focus on. Tony and Peter still found time to do their lab sessions, in which they talked about suits and techs they were working on, but also spent time discussing projects for the business, learning about the new development of Stark Industries to keep Peter up to date with SI projects. Tony suggested casually that he should come to the meetings with some clients. You know, intern director should be kept informed. Come to a meeting. It will be fun. You don't have to say anything or do anything. Tony had waved a spanner at Peter. Just be yourself. The first board meeting Peter had been invited to, he'd been quiet but attentive. He turned up in a shirt with a fitted cashmere sweater, explaining that he'd spent his first paycheck to buy some fancy clothes. Tony had freaked out seeing Peter in his clothes that weren't nerd t-shirt, but had kept it internal and told the kid he looked appropriate. Peter had sat next to him, and Tony had calmly explained to the clients why there was a damn high schooler in their confidential meeting. The kid sat and listened, watching as Tony described to the directors of the company who had investment in SI why they should stay invested, and the projected stock increase. It was endearing watching the kid make notes in a little notepad. This really wasn't a meeting that Tony had to attend. Really, it should be Pepper taking the meeting. But hell, the CEO had other things to do than reassure some clients that SI was not going to go under because of their recent commitment to renewable energy. The Avengers had public funding now because the government had decided to get invested. But all extra support came from Tony, and therefore, by extension, Stark Industries. Pepper and him had agreed that Peter's first official meeting would be a Tony-led thing. So hence, it had fallen to Tony to lead that meeting with clients. Later, when Tony and Peter were in the lab, Peter was working on a malfunctioning Iron Man repulsor, and he kept this is okay. He kept turning the spanner with a force that indicated some frustration. Damn, the kid was bothered. Tony lightly asked Peter what he thought about the meeting. He'd expected a quiet response, something vague, like most teenagers would say. Fine. Peter had been quiet in the meeting, but he had completely exploded, complaining about the clients and said that they're making you into a pushover, Mr. Stark. The kid had a bite to him today. Tony grinned and nodded. That's business, Pete. I haven't dealt with clients in many years, so I let Pepper give them an ass kicking when they need to. But don't worry, none of them have a spine. They trust me with their money, and they just feel the need to kick up a fuss whenever we join to a new project. The kid grumbled some more, muttering about something he wanted to see Pepper give them a talking to. Tony made a split-second decision he probably should have thought more about. Pete was ready to hear about the young boss protocol. Kid, how would you feel about an emergency protocol that left you in charge of this place for a bit, if Pep and I were indisposed, so to speak? When you say this place, Pete glanced around the lab. Stark Industries. The New York branch. Mainly Hong Kong and London too. If Pep isn't over there already? Tony waved his hand loosely, accidentally whacking Dummy in the face. Sorry, buddy. Peter's mouth dropped open. Mr. Stark? He was speechless. Tony's mouth quirked up into another smile. I'm taking that as a yes? Peter was definitely going to reject the offer. But the young boss protocol was already up and running. All it needed was a confirmation from Peter. And all Peter needed to do was be a bit more confident. This protocol would give him the confidence he needed. And anyways, it was only a matter of emergency. Tony, I can't. Peter ran his hands through his hair. I can't run a company. Pete looked like he was going to have a full-scale panic attack. Tony needed to go into damage control mode now. Hey kid, it probably won't happen. Tony reassured. If Pep isn't around, then I normally am. It's just in the case of emergency. You're the one we trust the most. No biggie. Okay. Pete was biting his nails. But Mr. Stark, only if you promise that this is emergency only. Of course, Pete. Of course. No big deal. Tony fist bumped the kid, both of them smiling. Okay, maybe Peter wasn't entirely ready to hear about being an heir, but this is a big step, and he was proud. From then on, Peter was in countless meetings with Pepper and Tony when he felt up to it. He was still balancing the senior year alongside Spider-Man and practically a full-time job. Although it wasn't too much of a burden, Pepper and Tony always made sure he didn't have too much to do and were more than happy to take work from him if he needed it. Senior year was basically boring anyway. Peter was fluent in Spanish and Italian now, mainly because of Tony's influence. All of science and maths subjects were easy as pie. Anyways, he would pass English even if he hadn't read the books they'd been set. School was a piece of cake. His real education now came from learning about the ins and outs of Stark industry. If the protocol where he was the boss was ever activated, he would be expected to lead meetings and control all of the assets in SI. For that, he needed to know about all the departments: sales, legals, R&D, assembly, production, HR, and etc. He spent countless hours going through Stark Industries' initiative with Pepper, Tony, or a folder and a wad of papers about the initiative. He knew about renewable energy and the arc reactors, prosthetics, the Stark phones, and all other wider technology advancements that the company were working on. The first time the Young Boss Protocol had been implemented was for an emergency that had happened on Peter's winter break. Tony had been on an Avengers meeting in Washington State, some army using a Chitauri tech, which had been zooped up by an extremely intelligent technician who had been forced into it. The Avengers had stepped in to take over the mission from the Washington Police Department, mainly because Bruce personally knew the technician who had been kidnapped to make the weapons. The farmhouse that the enemy base was in had been abandoned and had no cell service. Even if he could have left the fight, Friday wouldn't have been able to call him. Pepper, at the same time, had been out running had fallen down a flight of stairs and had broken her ankle. She would be perfectly fine, of course, and insisted to Tony that she could run the company while still in the hospital, until it was revealed that one of her tendons in her ankle had been severely damaged and she needed to have a surgery under anesthesia to get the surgeons to fix it. Running the company unconscious was not possible. So Friday, recognizing that both Tony and Pepper were MIA, contacted Peter. Peter had been building Legos with Ned, a Star Wars set he'd been wanting to build for the past month, when he got the notification. Peter? Peter had seen the Young Boss Protocol has been activated now notification straight from Friday and had sped over to his bag, shoving the cashmere sweater into the bag and pulling out the Spider-Man suit. "I have to go, Ned," he said breathlessly, no explanation, and just jumped out the window while saying, "I'll text you later." Ned didn't even know about the Young Boss Protocol. Honestly, it had slipped Peter's mind. He hadn't thought it would actually happen. It was faster to swing to the workplace than public transport. He didn't mean to come to Stark Industry until next day because he'd caught up on his paperwork. It was winter break and Tony insisted that he have some fun. Peter knew Tony was in an Avengers mission, but what happened to Pepper? That was his first priority before finding out what he had to do as a temporary boss. Holy shit, he was actually the boss of Stark Industry. Damn. "Karen, what happened to Pepper?" He called out to his AI, swinging in the direction of the tower. "Miss Potts went running and broke her ankle. She's going to be fine, but she must have a surgery to check one of her tendons." "Oh man, that sucks. I hope she's okay. Can you patch me to Tony?" "He's not available right now, Peter," Friday said. "In a remote area." Friday said, "He's in a remote area and in the middle of a fight. That's why Young Boss Protocol was activated." Okay," Thanks, Karen. It's no problem, Peter. Well, shit. Pepper wasn't a surgeon and Tony was unreachable. He was really in charge. When he swung into one of the open windows in his personal lab, he landed in Tony's lab, where he was awaited with a surprise. Whoa. Peter stared at the suit in front of him. It was really a nice suit, with a post-it note attached to it. Peter, I thought you needed a suit. And as a boss, you're gonna smash it. Tony. Mr. Stark had brought him a suit? Well, no wasting time. He quickly put off the Spider-Man suit and put his new suit on, which fit perfectly. Then he pulled on his badge, which just said Peter Parker, intern director. He kept forgetting it, and it made Happy really upset when he did. Peter then whipped the bag with Spidey suit into the wall, and it wasn't like anyone would be able to get it and get into the lab either way. After preparation, he finally jumped onto the lift to go down. Hi, boss. How can I help you today? Peter jumped. Friday had called him boss. Oh, Friday. Don't call me boss. I'm not Mr. Stark. Just call me Peter, like usual. If you're sure, Peter. Yeah, that was better. Less formalities, the better. That was temporary. This was temporary. Peter was nervous, in charge of a whole company. He breathed out, then asked, what is there that I need to do? There is a board of director meeting that starts in half an hour, which was, of course, led by Pepper. Well, it was supposed to be. Pepper left a research file on the desk that might help with that. Legal is also having some issues with the contract. R&D could use some assistance as well, but the less priority, that is a less priority. The intern heads have it sorted for now. Thanks, Fry. So the board of directors first and any other meetings? Colonel Williamson is coming from U.S. military later on this afternoon at 4 p.m. Oh, God, the military. Great. Peter mentally groaned. It was time for his initiation role. Anyone from the military other than Rhodey had never been cooperative. He wasn't looking forward to that. Friday could clearly sense his discomfort. I would suggest he rearrange for another day, if you prefer. No, it's okay, Friday. I've got this. Peter cracked his knuckles one by one. The lift was empty. Friday was fast-tracking to Pepper's office without letting anyone else on. Floor 58 had its own entrance. Okay, let's do this. It felt weird to sit on Pepper's chair, but Peter needed to do this to find the file, and as such, he sat spinning on the chair after he finally found the document, and he read the document. Most of the stuff he already knew from just talking with the R&D department about the new specs for the Stark phones, but Peter needed a bit of a brush up on the new photo mode they were adding that meant that any Stark drone would be able to operate through camera application instead of external app. The drones were going to be included in a bundle with a new phone to encourage customers to buy them. Okay, battery duration, preventing storage issues, drone camp. I think I got it. Friday, where's the meeting? Peter stood up, folder in hand. He tugged the blazer he wore, trying to get used to the suit. Usual place, the lift is for you. Thanks, Friday, Peter smiled and strolled into the lift, taking a deep breath. First solo meeting. There was a low rumbling. Mr. Parker, and several nods from the board. Peter wasn't expecting any complaints from these guys. Peter had been in several board meetings. He'd never let any of them on. But he often contributed to the board and had been informed of the young boss protocol. Is Pepper joining us today? She's in surgery, I'm afraid. I'll direct this meeting and then feedback to her. I promise anything you say to her, you shouldn't hold out on saying to me. The business smile that Tony had was on Peter's face. Mr. Young nodded and looked down at his paper. Good, no trouble for him. Now, should we start with the specs for the next generation of Stark phone? There was a collective nod, and the meeting began. It went well. Peter felt more relaxed in the meeting after the meeting was done, and there had been no complications. Peter had calmly delivered the information as Pepper would have done. Any questions the board member had was answered. On the lift back, Pepper's office, Peter pulled out his phone and concerned by the endless notifications he'd received during the meeting, causing his phone to continuously vibrate throughout the meeting. 15 texts from Ned, all concerned about where he went abruptly. Dude, where did you go? May is wondering. Do you want me to carry out on the Death Star? ... There were 3 missed calls from May, so he called back. Hey, May, he said, slightly breathless. May let out an outburst of questions. Is this some sort of Spider-Man thing? There's no news. Is this a secret Avengers fight? No, May, I'm at Stark Industry. It's, the young boss protocol, remember? Tony had informed May of it, explaining that it would only be enacted in emergency situation. Oh, do you need me to do anything? Are Pepper and Tony okay? Pepper is having a surgery for her ankle, but she's going to be fine. Tony is on a secret Avengers thing, so... There was an awkward silence. You're in charge, May said, a bit speechless. You're in charge of Stark Industries. Peter let out a breath, eyes darting around the lift. Something to look at. Yep. Well, I'll let you get on with your day, May said. Don't forget to have lunch. Tell Ned I'm sorry, please. We'll have to take a rain check. Thanks, May. He settled back down on Pepper's office, spinning around the chair. Friday legal next? I believe that would be the best course of action. I could have the contract sent up to you if you'd prefer not to go down there. No, it's okay. Peter stood up and wandered back to the lift. Will you explain the problem to me on the way there? Friday explained the issue they were having. Just some lawsuits with the newspaper publishing libel about Stark Industry and their weapons business. The head of legal, a guy named Andrew McGuire, needed a signature from the higher-up to authorize the lawsuit. They were pursuing against this newspaper. Apparently, Peter would do as well as Pepper or Tony, because he was the acting CEO. Who knew? The legal department, from Peter's experience at least, was a rush of people running places while holding bundles of paper and folders in their hands, looking stressed as hell. He went over to a couple of people who looked particularly stressed and tried to help solve their problems, even if some of the legal talk were completely over his head. After leading a hand, after lending a hand to a couple of people, he went to the McGuire and signed the necessary paper. McGuire thanked him kindly for the signature and left Peter to get on with his day. His next stop was, of course, the R&D, his favorite department in entirety of Stark industry. This was where the magic happened, the ideas that became reality. There was the stuff that was the stuff that got Peter's serotonin levels flooding. However, as he walked in, the intern head in charge of all the interns who dealt with Stark phones, Lisa, approached him. "Peter, lovely to see you." Lisa was blocking his entrance to the interns. Peter was itching to start helping them out, but alas, Lisa was an obstacle. "Hi, Lisa. How are you?" "Brilliant. I heard you were in charge today. How's it going?" "Okay, I think. Any explosions down there?" Peter glanced into the lab. He could see Jasper. Jasper was this buddy of his who'd gone to MIT for college and had told him of all the ins and outs of the college experience. He wanted to go and work on their project together, but his eyes danced back to Lisa. "No, I think I've got it handled. Feel free to wander. I know what you're like, but Peter, before you go, do you know what time it is?" No?" Peter glanced down at his watch. A subtly personalized Spider-Man-themed Stark watch that he adored, a gift from Pepper and Tony for his birthday. Holy crap, it was 2:15. Hell, time had flown. Maybe he had spent longer in legal than he thought. "Have you had lunch yet?" Lisa asked, clearly concerned. He sheepishly shook his head. "I'll be back." "I don't doubt that." He grabbed his normal sandwich from the pop-up Delmer store that Tony insisted be installed in the tower after he met Mr. Delmer and had learned how much the man helped out May and Peter when times had been hard. The free sandwich here and there had made all the difference throughout Peter's childhood. As a result, Mr. Delmer's son now worked in Stark Industries' cafeteria. They'd become fast friends as Peter liked to eat sandwiches, and Mr. Delmer's son was a Spider-Man fan who liked to make Peter the sandwich. Sandwich in hand, he returned to the R&D department to tinker with some of the project he'd been keeping an eye on. Lisa gave him a thumbs up, which he had returned, and he got to work. He spent an hour working on all sorts of projects, from experimental virtual reality technology to a prosthetic leg that was missing a couple of bolts. Friday then buzzed at him that it was 3:30 and he should head up to the office to prepare for the meeting with the guy from the army. On the way up to Pepper's office, he did a quick Google to read up on Colonel Williamson. He'd requested a meeting without giving Pepper any indication for what it would be. Peter had been briefed on how to deal with the military, which was basically to say no to any demands and try to not get angry. Colonel Williamson wasn't particularly intimidating. Sure, he was a tall, bald guy with bulky muscles, but Tony had told Peter to just look at his mustache and concentrate on that, because the mustache that the colonel had was very distinctive. Peter had thought that Tony had been joking, but he was right. Williamson's mustache was very distinctive. I was expecting to see Pepper Potts. The colonel looked him up and down. Peter quite calmly looked at Colonel's mustache and simply said, Pepper is currently having an emergency surgery. I am having the meeting with you instead. Well, that is preposterous. You look about 16. You should be in school, not trying to lead a meeting. Well, apparently the U.S. military hadn't been told about the young boss protocol, which it made sense as they work on external contract. It truly was a shame that Williamson hadn't been to any of the meeting that Tony had with the military since the young boss protocol had been implemented, because he's about to make a fool of himself by continuing to undermine Peter's authority. It's winter break, Peter said, still calm. He watched the way the colonel's face reddened in anger. I'd like to speak with someone higher up than some low-level intern doing admin for Stark Industry. It's from the U.S. military, for God's sake. Get me your manager. God, this colonel is a Karen. Okay, the colonel had decided to take a turn. He was definitely not going to like the plot twist that Peter, in fact, is the manager. I am the manager, Peter said, his voice rising slightly in volume. Please sit down, Colonel. I'm pretty qualified to have this meeting with you. No, I'm sorry. I won't discuss integrate military policies with a kid. You are not qualified. Peter struggled to not roll his eyes. Yeah, Tony was right. These guys were stubborn assholes. There were only one solution to this problem: to make Colonel believe him, short of Tony walking in himself and confirming it. Friday, could you please play the tape that Mr. Stark recorded? Tony had recorded a tape for people who weren't Stark Industry employee, who didn't believe Peter could possibly be in charge. They had anticipated the scenario happening, mostly because Peter looked so young and people were dicks. Of course, Peter. Friday played the audio recording. Listen up, folks. I don't know who you are, but let me just inform you. Peter Parker is currently operating as intermediary CEO of Stark Industry, filling in for Pepper and myself, Tony Stark, of course. He's perfectly capable of leading any meetings and knows the ins and outs of everything going on in Stark Industry. Please do not attempt to undermine his authority, or he is well within his rights to cut off our contract with you or terminate your employment. The colonel huffed, and when the tape reached the end, he looked extremely angry with the tone that Mr. Stark used. So, Colonel, shall we sit? Clearly still unhappy, he grumbled and sat down. So, how come you get to be in charge while so young? I've been the personal intern of Mr. Stark for years now, and recently promoted to intern director. Tony and Pepper have trained me, so I have in-depth knowledge of every aspect of the company. I'm perfectly qualified to handle meetings like this, but I believe we are not here to discuss my employment. You did not provide a subject matter, so you should start. Peter was really looking forward to what the colonel had to say. He fidgeted with the pen underneath his desk. Well, the U.S. military wanted to thank Mr. Stark for his work in the past, and we have no problem with our current contract, of course. This company has treated us extremely well over the year, but we wish to adapt some of our contract for another purpose, possibly. The colonel had said many words, and none of them contained anything worthwhile. Peter felt the need to clarify. We work with the military primarily of energy supplies and other minor technological contracts, Colonel. These contracts are non-negotiable and unchanging. I believe you are talking about opening a new contract with us. But what for? Peter could guess where this is going, and he did not want to entertain the possibility. The colonel shifted in his seat uncomfortably. No, I know that, but the military had proposition for Mr. Stark. Peter immediately cut off the colonel. If this is about weapons, I will remind you that Tony Stark stated 10 years ago, after being kidnapped and tortured in Afghanistan, we at Stark Industry no longer manufactures, creates, or supply weapons to the U.S. military or anyone else. I'm not stupid. I know Stark Industry doesn't make weapons anymore. The colonel took the time to sip his coffee. Peter very determinedly stared at his mustache, which had a droplet of coffee in it. The colonel continued, I want to commission Tony to make us some sets of armor for our use. Peter felt the volume of his voice raise as he continued talking. You're telling me that you want self-operated, military-owned Iron Man suit? Didn't Justin Hammer try that? I'm pretty sure that went down badly. Wasn't there some kind of attack? The colonel blatantly ignored him, which was fair enough. It was a bit accusatory, and the whole HammerTech contract was probably a mistake the U.S. wanted to hide under the radar. Tony knows what he's doing with the suit, the colonel stated. We know he has now made 20 of those suits for personal use. Peter quirked an eyebrow. 20? That was an understatement. And he and the company would be paid very well for the military. Tony is a billionaire who knows how to invest, Colonel. With all due respect, I don't think Mr. Stark nor the company needs your money. Peter took a breath. Look, Colonel, Tony only does things that he knows are morally correct. He has been kind enough to the United States military. I would think after giving you the very suit that War Machine currently operates, for free, might I add. War Machine is one man. He cannot protect all of the interests we need defended. These suits, but Peter had enough. It's going to be a no, Colonel. The U.S. military has no right to guilt-trip this company into supplying the military. Our energy contract remains out of formality from the past. Tony would not want his suit operating for you. I will be speaking to Pepper about this, the colonel warned. I would suggest you do not attempt that. I will inform her, of course, the content of this meeting, and I assure you she will agree with me wholly. Pepper would probably talk more nicely, and it would be the sentiment. There would be no way Tony would ever commission Iron Man suits for the military. I'm sorry, but I can't take the word of a child. The colonel spat at him. It sounds like you're undermining my authority. I would be careful of doing that, Colonel. Peter stood up, and so did the Colonel Williamson. You can tell Tony Stark and his son is exactly like him. Abrasive, arrogant, and pain in the ass. With that, the colonel stalked out the room, fuming. Peter could imagine the steam coming out of his ears. He kind of wanted MJ to sketch it out, just to have an image. He shook his head. Business today. Goodbye, Colonel. I'm sure I'll be seeing you again soon. Peter called out to the colonel. Then he collapsed back into the seat. Damn, one hell of a meeting. He glanced up to the ceiling. Tell me you were recording that Friday. Of course, Peter. Unless you ask me not to, I record every meeting that happens in here. Do you want me to share the recording with anyone? Hell no. He didn't want anyone to see Colonel had called him that. It would be too embarrassing for Tony to see, especially, and he would probably kick the shit out of Colonel just for this tone. No, not yet. Maybe Pepper when she gets back to catch her up to speed. The man is a piece of work. Is there anything I can help you with? No, not... Well, actually... Peter hesitated. Friday... Are Mr. Stark and I really that similar? I have analyzed your speech pattern and have found they match 85% of the time. In reference to your tone, inflection, and level of sarcasm, especially when you're working, they tend to align. Well, geez. That guy called me Mr. Stark's son. That's embarrassing. I didn't even correct him. Peter sat up. I didn't even correct him. Oh, God. Boss always calls you kid. It's a fair assumption. Colonel Williamson was not the first to assume that you two are biologically related. Peter spun around in his chair. What? Friday? Who else has? Captain Rogers made the connection when he was first introduced to you. And I believe Colonel Rhodes and Boss had a very distinct talk after that time he walked into the lab and you were encased in the Iron Man suit that you were working on with Tony. The colonel was hyperventilating for most of it, assuming you had been neglected for 15 years of your life. Rhodey thought we were related? Peter's eyebrow shot up. Wow, seriously? Isn't he like Tony's best friend? They have known each other since Boss was in MIT as a teenager. And yes, he did think you were related. Tony may have led him on for a little bit before telling him the truth. Wow, that's embarrassing, Peter chuckled at himself, then paused. Wait, did you say Captain Rogers? As in Captain America? As in Mr. Steve Rogers, Captain America? Yes, he also thought you were Tony's son. Peter sat back in the chair, and it made a lot of sense. When he had met Steve, the man had been extremely twitchy and wide-eyed around Peter. Is that why he's so weird around me when we first met? He kept asking me questions about where I was from and my childhood and stuff. That makes sense. Why on earth did he think we were related? You'd have to ask him that yourself, Peter. But I can think of a few similarities. Best not to think about that. The fact that he was similar to his boss-mentor-father figure, hopefully Tony hasn't noticed. Speaking of, is Tony back online yet? It would be nice to talk to him. See if there were any problems in Stark Industry that Tony had noticed, which Peter could work on, as there were no more meetings today. Not yet, I'm afraid. Thanks, Friday. Is it okay if I go back to R&D for a while? You're the boss, Peter. Oh, yeah, I'm going to go back to R&D. Back to his favorite department. Liza requested his assistance in an issue they had been having with finding the ambient operating temperature for the new Stark phones. After deliberation and testing, Peter had figured out and sped up the production by a whole week, giving them more time to perfect the Stark phone and drone bundle instead of worrying about the phone's release. They knew it would sell. The phones always did. They were reasonably priced, good quality, and better than any others on the market. He led the advertising department relations down in public relations, know about the decreased time needed for production, then moved on. After helping an intern named Isaac finish off the prosthetic he had been working on earlier that afternoon and dancing around to help a few others with familiar faces, he glanced at his phone to see that he had missed called from Pepper. She must have been out of surgery. He signed out of the lab for the night, waving goodbye to Jasper and the others before returning to Mr. Stark's penthouse. Pepper, hi, how are you doing? Perfectly fine. My ankle is all better, thank you. How are you? How was your day as a boss? She sounded tired, Peter noted. That made sense after the day she had had. Peter thought about it, reviewing the day in his mind. Really, he wanted to explain everything that happened in detail because there was just so much. But she had gotten out of surgery, and probably had equally tiring day as him. She deserved to rest without him dumping all his problems on her. It was exhausting, but good, I think. No explosions. Well, that's better than some of the times Tony had been left in charge. Although normally he's the one who's making the explosion. Pepper chuckled. I spoke to Colonel Williamson. I don't think he'll come back for a while. I was a bit, firm. Peter chose a nice word to describe his behavior, thinking back to the insult. Pepper didn't need to know that. Thanks, Peter. You're a star. I didn't want to deal with him. I get distracted by his mustache, Pepper mused. Anyways, order some dinner, and you can crash at the penthouse if you want. Oh, cool. I might be asleep by then, but thanks. I'll grab some dinner. Thank you for today, Peter. It sounds like you did a great job. Well, nothing broken at least. No problem. I hope you feel better. Bye. Goodbye. Pepper hung up and Peter called for the pizza. He would have ordered something from the cafeteria down below, but it was actually later than he thought, so cafeteria was closed. Even Mr. Delmer's son had gone home. Soon he had ordered his usual. Then he collapsed on the sofa thinking about the day. Peter forced his brain to the actual work side, avoiding thinking about any of the intern project, but more on the intern himself. It had been a busy day, but he wished there had been more time to actually connect with the people in Stark Industry. Understanding the company as a whole is necessary for being a CEO. That's what Pepper said anyway. And the employees were the key to the company. If he got time, maybe in his next school break he would tour the building. Mentally, he drew up the plans for the next time he visited. When his pizza arrived, his stomach rumbling, he started scrolling on the various social media apps as he ate. To distract himself thinking. Peter was so exhausted though, so after he finished his pizza, he sent a quick text to May explaining that his day had gone well and that he was planning to sleep over at the tower. He remained that way. He dozed off on the sofa and he remained that way for at least a couple of hours, flat out sleep, until there was a shuffling of footsteps and someone quietly flickered one of the lights on. One of Peter's eyes lazily opened, but he wasn't worried. The only people who could access the apartment other than himself was Pepper and Tony, and they had to do a biometric scan to get in. That was just Tony arriving home from a mission. He was right. Hey, kid. Tony ruffled his hair as he came into the room. I heard you gave Williamson a talking to. How'd you know, Fry? Peter was sleepy. He could see Tony, but it was hazy. He was asleep, safe in the comfort of Tony's sofa. No, Fry didn't tell anything. Pepper did. I tried your phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Good. Tony hadn't seen what the colonel had said about him. Tony sat next to him in the small space between Peter's feet and the edge of a sofa. Sorry, I was asleep. Peter yawned and sat up. It's okay. Your day was probably more tiring than mine. Tony's voice sounded exhausted too, though. He probably needed some sleep, just as much as Peter did. How's the mission? It was all good. We got Brucey's friends to safety and arrested the bad guys. Clint broke his arms from the fall, but other than that, everyone's okay. Peter bit his lips. Whenever one of them got injured, he was reminded about how breakable they were. Just human, all of them. Well, except for Thor. He supposed, thank God, Tony had his suit of metal to keep him mostly protected. He normally came away with a cut at least, but rarely any serious injury. Good. Sorry for disturbing your winter break with Stark stuff. I know you wanted some time with your friends. Peter waved it off. It's okay, Mr. Stark. Peter smiled. It's a good day. Pretty productive. Pep's back to work tomorrow, so you're relieved of your CEO duties. Hopefully, Ned would be around for Lego session tomorrow, and then he could make up for flaking on him today. Peter could explain to him all the crazy things he had done today, including the military official meeting. I think I'm going to sleep for the next 48 hours. Yeah, me too. Well, that was a lie. Although Mr. Stark could probably sleep for the next 2 days, it would be the most sleep he had had all year. Mr. Stark, we both know you're gonna sleep for 4 hours and then get cracking on your metal suit. Tony chuckled and nodded. Look, Pete, well done today. I don't say it enough, but you're a great kid. Thanks, Mr. Stark. They quieted, and Peter curled up into the sofa, finding his eyes closing once again. Tony did the same. Content. Pete felt himself slipping off into the darkness once again, finally ending the long day he had.